Hello? My name's Nadina, and this isn't a story about war, not the kind I was trained for. I came back from serving overseas, only to find a different kind of battlefield. My mother, on the floor, my brother, fists raised, eyes full of rage, his wife laughing with her family on speakerphone, like my mother's pain was some kind of joke. They told everyone I left them, but behind closed doors, they were erasing me and rewriting our family story without me in it. How did it go from Christmas memories to police reports? How do you fight for someone who's too scared to ask for help? And how do you get your home back when it's been turned against you? Let me tell you what happened. The snow fell in heavy sheets, blanketing everything in white as I stepped out of the cab and onto the sidewalk in front of the house I used to call home. The street was quieter than I remembered, no kids playing, no barking dogs. Just the sound of tires crunching over packed snow and the distant hum of an engine dying out. It had been 3 years since I last stood here, in Billings, Montana. 3 years since I'd boarded a bus in full uniform, trying not to look back. Now there was no uniform, just a heavy winter coat, my old army duffel, and boots that weren't military issue anymore. Civilian. Like me. Supposedly. I stood at the gate, the air biting through my scarf, and blinked up at the house. Something was wrong. Not the structure. It still had the same pale blue siding and the wooden porch Dad had built. But the sign, where it used to read the Rayburn Home, it now said, Curtis Vera May Rayburn Family Residence. A glossy brass plate, bolted in with care. I froze. Just stood there staring at it, my heart thudding hard. My name was gone. Our parents' names were gone. Just Curtis and Vera May. I double-checked the address, although I didn't need to. I'd memorized every crack in the sidewalk here, every bush along the fence line. Still, I looked again, willing it to be a mistake, but it wasn't. No one had told me. No one had warned me. I opened the gate slowly. It creaked like it always had. That sound used to make me smile. Now, it sounded like something breaking. I walked up the porch steps, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. Maybe they were just showing off. Maybe Vera had a flair for making things official, overdoing things as she always had. Maybe it was harmless, but it didn't feel harmless. It felt intentional. I turned the knob, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The warmth inside hit me like a wave, and for a split second, I was back in middle school, throwing off my backpack, hollering for Mom. I almost called out. Then I heard it. A crash, sharp, wood on wood, furniture tipping over. Then Mom's voice. Please, Curtis. Please, just give me a second. I'll fix it. I didn't mean to. Please. Her voice cracked, small and terrified. I dropped my bag. From the hallway, I moved in slow, controlled steps. My body knew what to do before I could think. Shoulders low, breathing even. I scanned as I moved, walls still the same. The family photos along the hallway, gone, replaced with Vera's modern art prints and pictures of her kids. My stomach twisted. Then I reached the living room, and everything inside me went cold. Curtis had Mom pinned in the corner near the bookcase. She was on the floor, shielding her face with both hands, her body curled inwards. His fist came down again, hard. She whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. You think you can control me? Curtis snarled. After everything I've done for you, you ungrateful old hag? On the couch, Vera May sat with a phone on speaker. Loud laughter came through. Somebody on the other end was laughing like this was a show. She crying already? A woman's voice cackled. What a weak old thing. Vera didn't respond, just chuckled and looked toward the kitchen like she was debating getting a snack. My throat clenched, but I didn't speak. My fingers found the inside of my coat pocket, curling around the cool edge of my phone. I didn't pull it out, didn't yell, didn't lunge. I stood still. I let the scene burn itself into memory. The overturned lamp on the floor, the torn pages from the photo album that used to be on the coffee table, Mom's slipper, twisted and far from her feet, Curtis's wristwatch catching the light mid-swing, Vera's smirk, the sound of that woman on the phone calling my mother pathetic. They hadn't noticed me yet. That gave me seconds. Seconds I used to breathe, to commit, to ready myself. Curtis raised his arm again. Don't stop on my account, I said, voice low, cold, louder than I intended. It sliced through the room like glass shattering. He froze mid-motion, his fist hanging in the air. Then he turned slowly, like his limbs weighed too much. When our eyes met, his mouth parted slightly. I saw the flicker, shock, calculation, then resentment, like I was the one intruding, like I was the problem. He dropped his hand. "Nadina," he said. That was all. Not "your home," not "how long have you been standing there?" Just my name. Flat, defensive. Behind him, Mom peeked through her arms, her eyes wide and wet. Her mouth trembled. I took a step forward. Curtis tensed, but I didn't move toward him. Instead, I looked him up and down once, then over to Vera, who had finally turned to me with a lazy arch of her brow. "I said," I repeated, "don't stop. You looked like you were enjoying yourself." The silence that followed was heavy, thick. Curtis's face flushed, his chest rising unevenly. Vera didn't laugh this time. I looked down at my mother, then back up. "Guess the nameplate was right," I said. "I'm not family here anymore, just a witness." Curtis opened his mouth, but I was already turning around. Not to run, not to leave, but to find where they'd hidden my mother's phone, her medications, and the dignity they tried to erase. Curtis blinked, like I'd slapped him with my words instead of my hand. He stood stiff, breathing shallow, his eyes darting to Vera May, who didn't flinch, just sipped from her wine glass like nothing had happened. My mother was still on the floor, curled in on herself. She tried to sit up, wiping at her face with trembling fingers. "He just got angry," she mumbled. "It's not his fault. I forgot to—" Her voice trailed off like even she didn't believe the words. I didn't answer her. I knelt beside her quietly, my hands steady as I helped her to her feet. The heat coming off her cheek was unnatural. The bruising would be deep by morning. She smelled like lotion and menthol and fear. Curtis didn't apologize. Not with his mouth. His silence screamed louder than anything. And Vera? She turned the phone off speaker, but not before I heard someone on the line say, "Well, that party got dull fast." They hung up with a laugh. Curtis said, "You should have called if you were coming." "I did," I said. "Twice." He shrugged. "Must have missed it." I looked at Mom. "Did you know I was coming?" She shook her head no. That told me everything. I helped her sit on the couch, and when I stood again, the silence felt thick. I told myself I'd only stay a day, just to make sure she was okay. But I knew I was lying to myself. Vera plastered on a fake smile, like nothing happened. "You'll stay for dinner, right? I've got pot roast in the oven. Curtis loves my recipe." I didn't answer. I just looked around the room. The space that used to feel like childhood, warm, cluttered, safe, now looked like a showroom. Cold, too clean, sanitized of memory. I moved toward the hallway, past the staircase, the old coat closet. I needed to see if anything of mine still existed in this house. The hallway used to be lined with family photos. Me, Curtis, Mom, and Dad. Birthday parties, Sunday church outfits, Christmas mornings. But now? The walls were decorated with Vera's kids and their dog. Frames matched, backgrounds staged, smiles wide, not a trace of me anywhere. I opened the door to what used to be my bedroom. It was painted soft gray now. A guest room. Neutral. No books, no trophies, no leftover posters, just a bed, a side table, and a lamp with a cracked base. I wasn't just uninvited, I had been erased. I stepped back into the hallway, heart heavier than my duffel, and saw Vera setting the table. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged. "Hope you're hungry," she called over her shoulder. "I made extra." Curtis leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching. Not a word of apology. I took a seat on the far end of the living room and tried to breathe. Soon, Vera was announcing, "Dinner's ready." I didn't want to join them, but I needed to be in the room, to witness it, to understand the depth of what I was really walking into. The table had 6 chairs, one for Curtis, one for Vera, one for each of her 2 kids, one for Mom, no chair for me. Vera looked around and said, "Oh shoot, we're one short." "Hold on." She walked to the laundry room and came back with a plastic stool, the kind you'd use to reach a high shelf. She plunked it down near the sink and smiled. "It's all we have. Hope that's okay?" Curtis chuckled under his breath. His son smirked. I didn't say a word. I sat on the stool. My knees almost touched the sink. Vera began spooning food onto plates like she didn't just humiliate me. Mom sat across from me, eyes fixed on her plate, silent. Curtis passed around the roast like nothing happened, like I hadn't walked in on him assaulting our mother. He even asked if someone could turn on the game in the other room. I was the ghost at the table. Present, but unwanted. I chewed slowly. I didn't taste a thing. While they laughed about a local bake sale, I studied every inch of them. I watched Curtis's hands, how steady they were now. I watched Vera's sideways glances, her performative grin. I watched my mother slowly shrink into her seat. And I remembered. Curtis teaching me to ride a bike in this very driveway. How he told me to stop being afraid of falling. How he picked me up every time I scraped my knee. I remembered baking cookies with Mom, her wearing that yellow apron with the sunflower on it, flour on her nose. But now Curtis used those same hands to threaten the woman who raised us. And now, Vera wore that apron. I saw it hanging near the stove, like a trophy. None of it was theirs, but they'd taken it anyway. I swallowed the knot in my throat. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was a performance, a ceremony of domination. I wasn't just a guest, I was an intruder. And yet, I said nothing. Not yet. When the dishes were cleared and the TV was turned on for background noise, I stood. My plate was untouched. I looked at Curtis first, then Vera, then Mom. This used to be my house, I said. Now it's your playground. But I remember everything. And I walked out of the dining room. Not in retreat. In preparation. Mom didn't say a word when I helped her to bed that night. She sat quietly at the edge of the mattress, brushing invisible dust from her blanket like she had something to do with her hands, but no idea what it was. I tucked the Afghan around her legs just to have an excuse to linger. Her eyes stayed on her lap. I knew that look. It wasn't sadness. It was survival. It was the look people wore when they'd accepted something awful just to stay breathing. Curtis passed by in the hallway, eyes averted, not a word. Vera didn't even acknowledge me when I walked past the kitchen, though I caught a glimpse of her whispering into her phone again, her voice low but sharp. She was always whispering. Once the house had gone quiet, TV off, lights dimmed, the familiar creak of floorboards stilled, I slipped out to the porch. The air outside was heavy with snow again, soft flakes tumbling through the glow of the porch light. I sat on the old swing, the one Dad built. It groaned faintly beneath my weight. Same as it used to. Inside, laughter drifted from the back room. Curtis must have turned the TV back on after I left. Probably some late-night sitcom or sports recap. All white noise, all pretend. I stared out at the dark street, the parked cars half buried in snowbanks. Something in my gut told me this wasn't some brief slip. Curtis losing his temper, Vera being rude. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a pattern, and patterns don't change unless something breaks them. When my fingers started going numb, I stood up and quietly stepped back into the house. Lights were off in the hallway. Curtis and Vera's door was closed. The kids were already asleep, their bedroom door cracked with a faint glow from a nightlight. I tiptoed toward Mom's room. She was out cold, one arm hanging off the bed, her breathing deep but irregular. I opened her dresser drawer, the one on the far left. I used to sneak candy from it when I was a kid. She always kept her important stuff there. Church bulletins, expired coupons, family letters. And sure enough, beneath a stack of old bank statements, I found a manila envelope. Inside were papers, a lot of them. Some were legal-looking, with seals and signatures. Others were handwritten notes with numbers, check marks. I thumbed through the stack until one caught my eye. Transfer of ownership, property title and land use. My mom's name scrawled at the bottom in shaky penmanship. Above it, bold letters. Recipient, Curtis Rayburn. The date was 3 months ago, but that wasn't what made me stop breathing. There was a smear of something dark near her signature. At first, I thought it was ink, but it wasn't. It was dried blood. A fingerprint, partial, right where her hand would have rested if she had to steady herself. She didn't sign this because she wanted to. She signed it because she had to. I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers trembling, not with fear, but with something sharper. Not anger. Precision. The kind of stillness that comes just before a plan. I carefully folded the paper back into the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my coat. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, not without more. I moved to her nightstand next. I needed to find her phone. Something about the way she'd said she didn't know I was coming, it didn't sit right. But there was nothing on the table but a lamp and her reading glasses. I opened the drawer, tissues, a half-used bottle of lavender lotion, a pack of gum, no phone. I stepped into the hallway and peeked into the living room, where Vera had been earlier. There was a phone charger on the side table, but no phone plugged into it. Then I checked the kitchen counter. That's when I found it. Tucked beside the bread box was an old flip phone, the kind no one uses anymore. Small, scratched, half dead. I pressed the power button. It didn't light up. I opened the back. No SIM card. Empty. Like her. They'd given her a phone just for show, just in case someone asked. Something to wave around and say, "See, she's connected." But she wasn't. She was cut off, on purpose. I remembered something Vera said earlier in the week. We tried a smartphone, but she couldn't figure it out. It's just easier this way. That wasn't care. That was control. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and returned to Mom's room. She hadn't moved, but she stirred a little when I sat beside her. Her voice was soft, barely audible. "You shouldn't pick a fight," she whispered, eyes still closed. "They'll throw me out if you make trouble." I took her hand gently. "What if," I said slowly, "I threw them out first?" She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. I stayed with her until her breathing evened again. Then I stood, walked into the hallway, and closed the door gently behind me. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the guest room, my old room turned guest room, on the edge of the bed that didn't feel like mine. The walls were gray, the shelves bare, no photos, no signs I had ever lived here. But I was done being a ghost. When I finally laid down, I slipped the envelope under my pillow like it was a secret worth protecting. And it was. Before sunrise, I woke again. The house was still. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my coat, and slid the envelope deeper into my pocket. This wasn't about getting even. This wasn't about revenge. This was about erasing the erasure. About reminding everyone, especially Curtis, that my mother wasn't alone anymore, and that I'd come back for a reason. By morning, the house had returned to its usual performance: quiet conversations behind closed doors, forced smiles at the breakfast table, and everyone pretending like the night before hadn't happened. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee from the half-empty pot Vera had left on the warmer and sat at the kitchen counter, watching her move around like she was running a show no one had asked to attend. Curtis hadn't come downstairs yet. Mom was still in bed, probably nursing her bruises in silence. The plastic stool from dinner still sat near the sink, untouched. I didn't move it. Vera finally looked up. "You staying another night?" she asked, her tone neutral, almost too polite. "I haven't decided," I said, though I had. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. She gave a quick nod, like she'd been hoping I'd say that, but wasn't sure how to feel about it. "Well, just let me know. We've got routines here, you know, with the kids and Curtis's schedule and all." Right. Routines. I was the disruption now. She turned to leave, her phone already in hand, thumb tapping the screen. The moment she stepped into the hallway, I heard her voice drop to that low, venom-laced whisper she thought no one could hear, but the house carried sound too well. She signed it. "House is ours now," she said. "All she's got left is guilt." Then a pause before she added with a scoff, "Don't worry about the army brat. She's just passing through." Just passing through. I walked away before I did something I couldn't undo. My palms ached from how tightly I'd been gripping the mug. The day moved slowly. Snow had started falling again, not heavy, but steady enough to blur the edges of the trees lining the street. I watched it from the window in the living room, my mind reeling through everything I'd learned in just a few days. The paperwork, the blood, the missing SIM card, the whispers. This wasn't dysfunction. This was orchestrated abuse. That evening, It happened again. Curtis had been pacing for an hour after dinner. I could hear his boots on the floorboards, back and forth. The air inside the house had gotten stale with anticipation. And then the explosion came. I was upstairs, heading to the linen closet for a blanket, when I heard the first thud. Not loud, just enough to stop me mid-step. I moved toward the stairs, slowly, my footfalls quiet. From the landing, I saw him standing over Mom, who was crumpled near the dining table. Vera stood a few feet away, arms crossed, smirking. The phone in her hand was on speaker again. "I said stop asking me that, you old witch," Curtis barked. "I'm done repeating myself." Mom whimpered something I couldn't hear. And then, from the speaker, "Go ahead, Curtis. Knock her out of the will, again." Laughter. Actual laughter. On the other end of the line, someone was laughing like this was entertainment. Like my mother begging not to be hit again was comedy. I stood frozen, hand gripping the wooden railing so tightly my knuckles blanched. Curtis didn't see me. Vera didn't look up. I didn't step in. Not yet. Instead, I backed away slowly, breathing through my teeth, and returned to my room. Every cell in my body wanted to scream, to pull him off her, and make him understand what he was doing. But I'd learned long ago in uniform, the best retaliation is the one they don't see coming. That night, after the house settled and the fake apologies had been made, Vera brought Mom a glass of water and muttered something about needing to be more careful. I waited. I waited until their bedroom lights went off, until the kids were snoring down the hall. Then I went to work. Behind the bookshelf in the living room, tucked into the corner near the baseboard, I placed a small digital recorder. It was a backup one I used in the army, just in case. I'd brought it home by accident. Funny how that turned out. I hit record and walked away. The next day, I let things run as usual. I didn't react, didn't intervene, just blended. I helped with dishes, sat through awkward conversations, let Vera smirk, let Curtis breathe easy, let the poison simmer. That night, they spoke freely. They always did when they thought no one was listening. Curtis. Once the paperwork clears, Mom's gone. Yeah, we can finally put this place in my name. Vera. What about Nadina? She's sniffing around. Curtis. Let her sniff. She's not even family anymore. Then silence. And after a beat, Vera's voice, calm and surgical. Blood doesn't matter. Ownership does. The next morning, I retrieved the recorder. My hands didn't shake this time. I took it upstairs and played the file back, sitting on the edge of the guest bed. Every word hit like a hammer. They'd cut her out. Me too. In their minds, this was all theirs now. The house, the history, the control. But the thing about ghosts? We don't stay buried forever. That afternoon, I made a list. Not a hit list. Not even a revenge list. Just a map. A diagram of connections, power plays, names, dates. Who knew what? Who said what? Who stood by and said nothing? It was the beginning of the end, and it wouldn't come with fists or shouting. It would come with truth. Carefully, I returned the recorder to its spot. There would be more to capture, and I wanted them comfortable. Comfort makes people sloppy. They'd already shown me who they really were behind closed doors. Now, I just needed to keep them talking. I waited until Curtis and Vera were both asleep, the way a hunter waits for a predator to lower its guard. The house was still. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional wind rattling a loose pane reminded me I wasn't dreaming. I didn't dream here, not anymore. Mom had finally drifted off, curled on her side, a pillow tucked under her arm like a shield. I stayed beside her until her breathing slowed, then slipped out of the room and into the hallway with steps I'd mastered from a decade of moving through places I wasn't welcome. I needed answers. Not about the fights, not about the bruises. I already knew what kind of man Curtis had become. I needed the history, the old version, the one they hadn't gotten around to rewriting yet. The attic was always a mess of forgotten seasons and misplaced holidays. It still smelled like cedar and mothballs. I pushed open the narrow door at the end of the hall and climbed the wooden steps, each one creaking under my weight. At the top, dust danced in the air like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Vera hadn't touched this place, too high, too cluttered, too full of things that didn't fit into her vision of a modern family estate. I opened boxes marked with our father's handwriting, Christmas lights tangled around faded garland. A box labeled Nadina, School, made my throat tighten. I didn't open it, not yet. Beneath a pile of worn blankets and a broken lamp, I found it. A small tin box, the kind people use to keep stationery or old recipes in. The edges were rusted. The latch stuck, but it opened after a second try. Inside, a folded letter rested on top of an old photograph, the kind printed from a drugstore kiosk. I blinked at the image. It was me, maybe 5 years old, sitting on Mom's lap in the backyard. She had a daisy tucked behind one ear. My hair was in pigtails. We were laughing at something just outside the frame. Beneath the photo was a single page of paper, yellowed and creased. It wasn't dated. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "You're the only one I trust with silence," it read. I had to sit down on the attic floor. I didn't cry. Not really. But something inside me eased, like a knot that had been tightening since I walked through the front door had finally loosened. Mom had never been the type to say too much. She'd grown up in a generation that stitched grief into the lining of their aprons, but she'd written this. She'd saved this. She'd hidden this. And that meant she'd never really stopped believing I'd come home. Tucked in the envelope was one more note, shorter, barely a sentence. "Don't forget whose daughter you are." I tucked both notes into my jacket pocket like they were sacred. When I climbed back down, I didn't go back to bed. I went to the hallway closet, the one next to the den. Vera kept it locked most of the time, which only made it more interesting. But I'd watched her punch in the key code earlier that week. She thought I wasn't paying attention. That was her first mistake. The code worked. The door clicked open. Inside were old DVDs, a Wi-Fi router, a stack of outdated modems, and at the very back, a battered lockbox. A small envelope rested on top, marked in black ink. "Surveillance? Copy." My stomach flipped. I took the USB drive inside and slipped it into my laptop in the guest room. It buzzed to life, older than I expected, but still functioning. A single folder opened, Archive 2022 Q3. The files were time-stamped and dated. I clicked through them quickly. Many were corrupted or incomplete, but one clip stood out. Dated November 12th, about 3 weeks ago. I hit play. The footage was grainy, angled from the corner of the dining room ceiling. Curtis stood over Mom. She was trying to get up from her chair, arms bracing on the table. Vera stood in the kitchen archway, arms crossed, saying nothing. Curtis shoved Mom with one hand, hard. She crumpled. The screen didn't shake. The camera didn't blink. It recorded everything. Curtis stepped over her like she was an obstacle. Vera turned away. No one helped. I paused the clip, closed my laptop. This wasn't hearsay. It wasn't interpretation. It wasn't exaggeration. This was proof. That night, I printed 4 stills from the footage. Each one captured a moment. His hand mid-push, her body mid-fall, Vera's face turned away. The timestamp in the bottom corner. I folded the photos into a blank envelope and carried it quietly to Curtis's bedroom. His door was slightly ajar. I could hear him snoring. Vera was murmuring in her sleep. I slipped the envelope beneath his pillow. I didn't write a note. I didn't need to. The next morning, I stayed quiet, ate my toast, drank my coffee, watched the way Curtis fidgeted when he came downstairs. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask anything, but he didn't sit comfortably either. Vera avoided me entirely. By afternoon, I found him standing at the fridge, staring at the open door like he forgot what he came for. I leaned against the counter and said, "You look tired." He didn't respond. I smiled, just barely. Nothing disappears forever, not even you. That night, I lay beside Mom again, listening to her soft breathing, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what I'd done. Not yet. "It's my house now," I whispered, voice steady. "I just haven't taken the keys back yet." She didn't answer me, not with words at least. Her hand hesitated over the drawer's edge, hovering just above the flash drive labeled Property Truths. It wasn't just curiosity on Vera's face, it was recognition. That flash of knowing, that pause where you realize the script is slipping out of your hands. She slowly pulled the drawer shut. I stayed in the doorway, arms crossed. What's wrong, Vera? I asked, keeping my tone even. You look pale. She blinked, gathered herself, then offered a smile so rehearsed it could have been painted on. Just tired. Been a long week. I bet. That was the only exchange we had that morning, but I noticed how her eyes kept flicking toward the drawer during breakfast, how her laughter was a second late during small talk with Curtis, and how, when she thought I wasn't looking, she checked the front door's lock twice. Curtis was quieter than usual, too. He kept rubbing his temple with the heel of his hand, and when I passed him in the hallway, he flinched just slightly. Not much, but enough to tell me the photos under his pillow had been found. Good. The foundation of power, I'd learned, isn't noise, it's silence. And silence, used right, terrifies people like them. By mid-afternoon, I was in my car, headed east down Route 2 to a small town just 20 minutes outside Billings. It was one of those towns with a single diner, a gas station that still sold VHS tapes in a bargain bin, and a courthouse that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. That's where I found Raymond Slate. He was sitting alone at the far booth in the diner, stirring sugar into his coffee like it required surgical precision. He was thinner than I remembered. My father's old friend. He used to come by the house on Sundays to talk politics with Dad and drink whatever beer Mom had hidden in the back fridge. He was a notary back then. Still was. When he saw me walk in, he looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. "Nadina," he said, shifting in his seat. "Mind if I join you?" He gestured to the seat across from him. "I figured this day would come." I took my time. Let him feel the weight of it. "I saw your signature on a transfer," I said, not bothering to soften the words. "My mother's property. The one she doesn't even remember signing." Raymond looked down at his cup. "She signed it. I watched her do it. She bled on the paper, Ray." His hand clenched around the spoon. "She was injured, scared, and vulnerable. And you notarized that." He swallowed, hard. "I knew she wasn't herself. But Curtis, he said if she didn't sign, they'd put her in a home. He said she didn't have money to keep up with bills, and she'd be out on the street. He made it sound like this was her best option." I stared at him. "So you backed it, because it was easier." He didn't deny it. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it truthfully. And I want you to understand that what you say next might be the only decent thing you've done for her in years." He looked at the phone. "Are you recording?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Ask. Did you knowingly notarize a transfer of ownership from my mother while she was cognitively impaired, physically injured, and under pressure from my brother?" Raymond took a long breath, then said, "Yes." I stopped the recording, saved it, put my phone away. "Why now?" he asked. "Why not sooner?" "Because now," I said, "you don't get to be part of the cover-up. You get to be part of the correction." He looked like he was about to cry. I didn't wait for it. I paid for my coffee and left him with the check. Back home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow that hadn't melted in days. The air inside the house felt different, staler, like it knew change was coming. Before heading inside, I made a detour next door to Mrs. Hollins's house. She was my mother's age, had been their neighbor for over 2 decades, and was always the one to bring banana bread after holidays. She answered the door in a cardigan and slippers. "Nadina," she said, eyes widening. "I didn't think—" I held up a hand gently. "I know it's late. I won't stay long." She nodded and stepped aside. In her kitchen, over herbal tea that smelled faintly like mint and cinnamon, I told her what I needed. At first, she hesitated. I saw him pull her by the arm. Once, she fell into the bushes, scraped her elbow, but I didn't want to get in the middle. It's family, you know. And sometimes— "No," I interrupted, softly but firmly. "I don't know. Because there's nothing normal about dragging your mother out of her own home and leaving her bleeding." She looked down at her tea, then up at me. "You're right. I should have said something." "Say it now," I said. "I have a lawyer. I have statements. But an eyewitness, someone who doesn't owe anything to anyone, that means something." She took a deep breath. "Tell me what you need me to do." That night, back in the guest room, I opened my laptop and began organizing everything. Audio files, labeled and time-stamped, video clips, stitched and backed up. Notary confession, check. Eyewitness willing to testify, secured. I opened a new Word document. At the top, I typed, "When they ask why I didn't strike first, I'll say, it wasn't yet time." I leaned back in the chair, let the weight of that sentence settle into me. Timing mattered. Precision mattered. The mistake people like Curtis made wasn't that they acted cruelly, it was that they assumed no one was watching long enough to connect the dots. Downstairs, I heard Vera rustling in the kitchen, drawers opening, papers shifting. I knew exactly which drawer she'd be drawn to. The flash drive I'd labeled Property Truths wasn't just a trick. It was bait. Sure enough, when I walked past the staircase, I caught her standing by the counter, fingers clenched around the drive. Her face was ghost white. "What's wrong, Vera?" I said sweetly, stepping into view. "You look pale." Vera didn't say another word after I asked. Her knuckles whitened around the drawer handle, and she turned on her heel, walking stiffly into the dining room. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I'd planted enough doubt, just enough fear. That night, the house moved like something waiting to crack. No arguments, no accusations, but everyone was walking around each other like ghosts, not acknowledging what hovered between the walls. Silence was safer now for them. The next morning, the tension had congealed into something thicker. I could feel it as I stepped into the kitchen. The air was cold, not from the weather, but from the atmosphere. The heat was on, but no one dared break the stillness with casual talk. Curtis sat at the table with his elbows on the wood, his jaw clenched, eyes bloodshot. Vera stood by the coffee maker, her hand hovering over the sugar jar like she'd forgotten how coffee even worked. My mother hadn't come downstairs yet. I didn't blame her. I poured myself a cup of coffee, slowly, like every movement deserved attention. Then I sat across from Curtis and opened my laptop. The room went still. I didn't look up when I spoke. "I've sent everything to a lawyer," I said. "One who specializes in elder abuse cases. He's already filed for a civil review. Police reports in process. And the hotline? They've logged your names, both of you." Curtis slammed his hand on the table. "You're tearing this family apart." I finally looked up. "No, Curtis, you did that when you treated Mom like furniture, when you decided I wasn't family anymore, when you used blood and bruises to write your version of history." His face reddened. "You don't know what she's like." "I know exactly what she's like. She raised me. She covered for you even after you humiliated her in her own living room. She was scared, but she still made excuses for you. That's not weakness. That's love. You just don't know how to receive it without owning it." Vera let her spoon clink too loudly against the mug. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. "I thought you might want to see what the lawyer's working with." I laid the folder on the table and opened it. First, the scan of the property transfer. Darlene's signature barely legible, a faint smear of dried blood still visible. Next, printed photos. Her wrist with fading bruises, the dark spot on her temple from the fall, time-stamped video stills of Curtis pushing her in the dining room while Vera stood idly by. Then, the printed transcript. Curtis's words. "Once the paperwork clears, Mom's gone. Nadina, she's not even family anymore." I didn't dramatize it. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "You hit our mother. You erased me. Now I erase your control." Curtis looked like he wanted to throw something. Instead, he sat frozen, hands fisted on either side of the folder. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Vera looked at him like he was something disgusting stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "I'll be forwarding this to the sheriff's office later today," I continued. "There's also a copy at my lawyer's firm, off-site, so if anything happens to the original, it doesn't matter. It's already moving." Then I pulled a small flash drive from my coat pocket and placed it on the table in front of him. "In case you want to hear yourself confess again." Curtis reached for it but hesitated, fingers just brushing its edges. The silence stretched so long, I thought no one would breathe. Then, finally, he stood up. But not to fight, not to yell. He just stood there, staring at me, and then looked over at Vera like he expected her to do something, say something to shift the tide. She didn't. She just backed a step toward the fridge, her expression unreadable. Curtis turned like he might leave the room. Then he stopped, shoulders tight, and said low, "You don't know what you're doing." I met his gaze evenly. "That's the first thing you've said that's true. You don't know what I'm capable of." He didn't reply. Just left the kitchen like a man trying to disappear through drywall. When I looked at Vera, she wasn't sneering anymore. She looked small, like the storm she had danced in had finally hit her skin. I stood, walked out without touching my coffee. Mom was in the hallway, peeking from around the corner. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I took her hand gently. "He won't touch you again." For the first time, her eyes filled, not with fear, but something closer to disbelief, maybe even relief. Later that afternoon, I passed through the living room. The wall that had once been stripped of everything from my childhood now bore something new. A photo of me, small, maybe 6 or 7, on Dad's shoulders, reaching for a branch of blooming lilacs. It hadn't been there the day before. Underneath it, a note taped gently to the frame. "This house remembers you now." I stood in front of it for a long moment, just breathing. It was never about the picture. It was about being seen, about truth taking its place again. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I meant to, staring at the photo and that little note someone had taped beneath it. I didn't ask who had put it there. Curtis wouldn't have. Vera didn't do sentiment. Maybe it was Mom. Or maybe someone else had decided to tell the truth before I did. Either way, I didn't move until I heard the knock. A low thud at the door. Not urgent, but deliberate. I turned, heart steady, and walked across the room. Through the glass, I saw the sheriff's cruiser parked at the curb, engine still running. The deputy stood just behind the sheriff, both of them bundled against the wind, their faces composed in that specific way people wear when they're about to deliver news or ask questions. I opened the door. "Ms. Rayburn?" the older officer asked. "We'd like to speak with Curtis and Darlene Rayburn regarding a report filed last week." My shoulders didn't even flinch. "Come in," I said. "They're inside." Curtis must have heard the voices, because he came around the corner before they stepped fully inside. He had that false calm about him, the kind people use when they think they can bluff their way out of a consequence. "What's this about?" he asked, arms folded, trying for control. The younger deputy gave a small nod. "Mr. Rayburn, we've received statements, medical reports, and notarized testimony indicating you may have coerced a vulnerable adult into signing legal documents under duress, as well as physically harmed her on multiple occasions." Curtis scoffed, a hollow sound. "You're kidding me. This is because of her?" He jabbed a thumb in my direction. "She's trying to take everything." "This isn't about her," the sheriff replied. "This is about your mother. We're here to ask questions, but I suggest you take this seriously." Curtis's jaw worked for a second. Then he laughed. "This is Nadina's revenge. You don't know her. She's always been like this, bitter, jealous, angry." Vera appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. "Curtis," she started, but he ignored her. "She's destroying everything we've built," he continued. "All this, the house. We made this place livable again." The sheriff didn't move. "Sir, we need you to come with us for questioning. You're not under arrest at this time, but if you refuse, we will have to escalate." Curtis tried to speak again, but something must have clicked. Maybe it was the badge, or maybe it was the realization that the story he'd built was finally collapsing. He stepped forward stiffly. "I'll get my coat," he muttered, then glanced at me. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. As he passed by me, Mom stepped out from behind the hallway corner, holding something small in her hands. Her eyes met mine before she moved forward. She held out her palm. In it, a keychain. Old, worn. A little rust along the loop. Attached was a simple tag, plastic, cracked with age, and inside it, a small strip of paper with my name written in her handwriting. "Nadina." "I kept these," she said softly. "Even when he changed the locks, I kept them. I just didn't know when to give them back." I took the keys from her slowly, gently curling my fingers around them. "I'm home now," I said. The deputies led Curtis out the front door. Vera didn't follow. She stayed frozen halfway down the stairs, her face unreadable. We didn't say goodbye. Later that day, after the cruiser pulled away and the house quieted again, I helped Mom gather her things. Not much, just a couple suitcases, a few framed photos, a box of old letters, and a blanket she swore she couldn't sleep without. We didn't pack anything that felt like it belonged to Curtis or Vera. This time, we were leaving with only what was ours. When I walked through the house, I noticed how empty it suddenly looked. Not physically, furniture still stood, curtains still hung, but emotionally, it no longer felt like a home someone was fighting for. It felt like a house that had decided who it wanted to belong to. At the base of the stairs, Vera stood motionless as we carried the final bag toward the door. I looked at her. She looked back. "You don't own stories, Vera," I said. "You just rearranged the furniture." She didn't respond. The wind outside had picked up, stirring the last of the snow into small spirals across the driveway. The sky was heavy with late winter gray. We stepped out into it, just Mom and me. The rental car was small, but it held everything we needed. I opened the passenger door for her, then slid behind the wheel. Mom buckled her seatbelt without a word, looking out the window at the house behind us. After a long moment, she asked, "Where to now?" I started the engine and watched the dashboard flicker to life. "Someplace quiet," I said. "But first, we plant new roots." We didn't drive far. Just 15 minutes outside the edge of Billings, down a 2-lane road that ran past frozen pastures and wooden mailboxes leaning with age, there sat a modest bungalow with white siding and a crooked porch, the kind of place that didn't pretend to be more than it was, the kind of place that knew how to breathe. I'd signed the lease 3 days earlier under both our names. My mother didn't know that part yet. She sat in the passenger seat, her fingers curling around the seatbelt as she stared out the window. When I turned into the gravel driveway, she looked over. "This is it?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It's small, but it's safe." She didn't respond right away, but I saw her exhale. Not relief, not joy, just the kind of breath someone releases when they've stopped holding everything in for too long. We unpacked slowly. There wasn't much: a few bags, a tin box, a framed photo, a blanket that still smelled like her old closet. We didn't talk much while we moved things inside. We didn't need to. The living room smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. The floor creaked in 3 different places. The walls had small nail holes from pictures long gone, but the light came through the windows just right in the afternoon. And for the first time in a long while, the silence felt clean, not oppressive. By evening, we'd settled into a rhythm. Mom made tea in the chipped kettle she insisted on bringing. I rearranged the bookshelf in the corner, tucking in 2 paperbacks and 1 framed picture of us from my Army graduation. It was the only picture we had taken together in nearly a decade. She looked proud in it. I didn't realize until then how rare that look had become. After dinner, leftover soup we'd picked up from the diner on the drive, she handed me a small envelope. "I meant to give this to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took it, recognizing the tin box from the attic. I hadn't opened it since we left the house. I'd told myself I'd wait until we were somewhere safe, somewhere that felt like ours. I unfolded the letter slowly, expecting to find something familiar. But it wasn't old. The paper was clean. The ink was fresh. "I wrote this last night," she said, watching my face. I read it in silence. "You were the only one who saw me as more than a bank account, the only one who didn't make me feel old, just real. I know I should have protected you, but I couldn't even protect myself. You gave me something I didn't know I could still have, a beginning." I folded the letter and slid it into the side pocket of my duffel bag. "I didn't need it," I told her, "but I'll keep it forever." She smiled, just a little, then reached for her tea. That night, I stood on the porch alone, wrapped in a sweater I'd found in the hallway closet. The stars were faint above the trees, the wind slow and quiet. Everything inside me still hummed with the residue of battle, but I could feel it fading, slowly. Mom went to bed early. I stayed up late. I kept thinking about that old house, about everything we left behind, and everything we took with us. The house was never the problem. It was the silence. The way it grew in corners, beneath rugs, behind picture frames. The way it convinced us we were alone even when we weren't. Now we weren't pretending anymore. We weren't erasing anything. We weren't rewriting our past. We were choosing what to carry and what to leave behind. I looked at the porch steps and imagined a row of potted herbs next spring. Maybe a wind chime. Maybe a bench. We weren't what we used to be. We may never be. But we could be something new, something real. Inside, I heard the soft creak of Mom's bedroom door, then her footsteps down the hall. She appeared in the doorway with a puzzled look. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking," she nodded. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She hesitated, then walked over and stood next to me on the porch. We didn't say anything for a while. Finally, she asked, "Do you think they'll leave us alone?" I looked out into the dark and thought of Curtis's face when the cruiser pulled away. Thought of Vera's silence on the stairs. Thought of everything that had been said behind closed doors. "I think they've already lost," I said, "even if they don't know it yet." Mom nodded. Then, with a kind of quiet bravery that felt new, she reached for my hand. It was the first time she had done that since I was a teenager. And maybe that, more than anything, was the start of something worth rebuilding. Later, after she returned to bed, I opened my laptop and began writing something I hadn't tried in years. Not a report, not a statement, just words, for myself. If someone tells you family is everything, ask them whose version they mean. And if they laugh while hurting you, walk away. The quiet ones carry more power than you think. I hit save, closed the screen, and whispered into the stillness of the room. No next chapter. Just a better life. But if you ever hear silence where love should be, listen harder. Sometimes the worst battles aren't fought overseas, they're fought inside the walls we once called home. This story wasn't just about justice, it was about reclaiming a voice that others tried to silence, about standing up, not with fists, but with truth. Have you ever had to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves? Or reclaim a space where you were made to feel invisible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might help someone else find theirs. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that remind us, family isn't about blood, it's about who stands beside you when it matters most.